Thank you. You know, there's a West African custom where when families meet each other, they say, "So how are the children?" They don't ask how you are. They want to know how the children are. Because the answer to that question tells them everything that they need to know about your values and your priorities. But for far too many of our children here in America, when we ask that question, the children are not well. I am the oldest of 3 boys that my mom and dad raised in New York City. In fact, they had 3 sons by the time they were 22 years old. My father was a New York City police officer, and my mother was an administrative assistant working for the state of New York. But they hunkered down and they did the best that they could to give their 3 sons all that they needed to be really successful and to take their rightful place in society. I was a good student. I enjoyed school. I had great school experiences. Eventually, I went on to become a teacher in the New York City public school system. And I saw children who were absolutely brilliant. I saw students who were artistically and athletically gifted. I saw students who were deeply inquisitive and would debate you at a moment's notice. The kind of kids that any one of us would say, "I'd love for him or her to be my child." But I also had students who were very angry and who acted out because they had experienced a level of pain and trauma in their lives that were very difficult for somebody like me to even comprehend. Most of those students who presented the biggest challenges for their teachers in school were the boys, and specifically boys of color. Those were the experiences that I had with young men who had great challenges, and for many of them, they did not have their fathers in their lives. And out of all the young men that I saw throughout my educational career, which spanned 30 years, none of them had as much of an impact on me as the Plummer brothers. This is a story about 3 boys who came to me when I was the principal of a school in the Bronx. They had lost their mother to drugs. Their father had been in prison for many years, and they barely had a relationship with him. And when I got to know them, it was their foster mother who brought them to us. And a year after she brought them to us, their foster mother passed away. So this was a trauma and a pain that these young people were feeling, these boys who went from being lovable, huggable, and cute when they were little to now bigger boys who were trying to figure out their way with the absence of parents, and very specifically, their father, who they all seemed to long for. And that was a story that I'd heard from so many of the boys that I dealt with throughout all of the years. The boys who were struggling to figure out how to navigate their way from boyhood to manhood in the absence of fathers to show them the way. One of the greatest challenges we have is that in the United States of America, we have the greatest mass incarceration rates on the planet. Back in 1920, 90% of black boys and black children grew up with a father at home. Fast forward 40 years later, 1960, the number was still as high as 80%. Today, the number hovers just a little bit more than 30%. So what happened? From 1970, Richard Nixon waged what was called the War on Crime. And that was the beginning of this explosion of mass incarceration in this nation, to the point that today, over 2 million Americans are in prison. The impact that that has had on our communities across this nation, but particularly in Black and Latino communities, has been tremendous. In fact, 1 in 3 black men has a likelihood of imprisonment at some time in their lives compared to 1 in 17 white men. But the seeds for this mass incarceration have been planted very early on, even in our public schools, where we even see today little boys as early as kindergarten who are being arrested, handcuffs placed on a 5-year-old. What sense does that make? These zero-tolerance policies that we have in our public schools, they do not work. It's a failed policy. I understand that it's a response to try to get tough and bring a level of discipline in our schools. But what our students need, and these young men need, they need us to understand the trauma that they're dealing with. And there are lots of students who deal with trauma. Black and Latino boys, however, deal with ongoing trauma. And that's the distinction. It's not a one-time trauma. And the narrative that plays out for them on TV and in the media every day is they see images of themselves in handcuffs. They never see positive images of their being able to be productive citizens. And that weighs on you psychologically. The teachers that they work with in school, who demonstrate often an implicit and an explicit bias. And these are teachers very often who mean well. But if you've not been properly trained in how to work with boys, and I've got news for you, the energy that boys bring in school can be a little different than what the girls do. That's just real. But the reality in the inner city schools is this increased presence of police in the schools. Many schools across America who have police officers, armed police officers in schools, and yet they don't have one guidance counselor. It shows us where our priorities are. A prison-like environment. Imagine going to school every day where you have to be patted down, or there are metal detectors. That's not a normal, natural way that you would expect any child in America to have to experience school. And yet that is the reality that so many young people across America in the inner cities, that's what they have to experience on a daily basis. And then once they're in school, this excessive attention to high-stakes testing, where schools and students are measured purely by how well they do on standardized exams. It's misplaced policy, because we should be focused on how do we create a comprehensive, well-rounded education where you have experience with the arts and so many other things that make for an inquisitive child who learns to take their rightful place in society and to learn to be inquisitive and want to learn and to be a better student. Not simply because of the score that you got on a math or an English exam. Our priorities are misplaced. The lack of investment and resources that will continue to provide our public schools with all that they need are not there for far too many schools, where you can go into the library in the school and see very few books and expect for those students to compete against other students across the country and across the world. It's not a fair fight. So what happens as a result of that? So many of our students are suspended from school. Because when you otherwise disengage in school, when in doubt, the teachers throw you out. One suspension in school increases your dropout percentage by over 50%. Think about that. And across America on an annual basis, 1.2 million students are dropping out of school. In fact, over 50% of black males do not complete high school across this nation. And out of those students who do not complete high school, over 52% of those black males find themselves incarcerated. It is the school to prison pipeline. And the seeds are planted very early. In fact, in New York City, Columbia University put out a report that said that 75% of the inmates for the entire state of New York came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. I don't think that's an accident. That's the reality that we have had to deal with. In fact, this nation spends over $100,000 to incarcerate an inmate and only $10,000 for a college student. Our priorities are not in the right place as a nation. So there have been a lot of people who've talked about these problems. There have been a lot of conferences and panel discussions. There have been a lot of books and studies and white papers that have been done. But at the end of the day, we looked around and we said, well, who's doing something about it? And I was part of an organization that I still remain a part of called 100 Black Men. It's an international organization of professional men who open the doors to opportunity for those in our community to try to create better opportunities for them to be successful. And we came up with the idea to create a public school in partnership with the Department of Education that would give young men a fighting chance. And we decided to create what we call the Eagle Academy for Young Men, which when we opened our doors in 2004 was the first all-boys public high school in New York City in more than 30 years. And there were no other all-boys public schools in the country when we opened our doors in 2004. So let me tell you what we have found in this work that we've done with these young men and what the secrets to the success has been and what we believe can be a model for the country to turn around the lives of these young men. First of all, creating a model around brotherhood and positive school culture. Young men need to begin to realize that they're not each other's enemy. They are, in fact, their brother's keeper. But in order to do that, you have to get them to, first of all, believe in themselves and to believe that the people who are working with them really care about them and have the best for them. So some of the things that we do at Eagle is all the young men wear a uniform. And it's a blazer and a tie, but each grade wears a different tie. Because if you start out as a sixth grader, the tie you wear in the seventh grade is a different tie. You have to earn your way to the next tie. It's a form of a rite of passage, if you will. All the young men in the school are organized around what we call a house model. And the houses are named after iconic men of color, so that it's a constant reminder to these young men that you stand on the shoulders of people who fought, bled, died, sacrificed, who gave to this country so that you would have an opportunity to go on and to be successful. And when you instill that notion into their consciousness, it truly makes all the difference in the world. Because if you don't know who you are, if you don't know where you've come from, if you don't believe that your family or your community has ever made any meaningful contributions, you're like a chicken with your head cut off, and you run around aimlessly. But when you truly believe that you stand on the shoulders of giants, and you understand what that means, you will behave accordingly. And that is missing in far too many of our schools. Caring adults, deeply caring adults. It's been said that if students don't believe that you care, they don't care what you think. And at Eagle, we care, and we've provided them with mentors. We've trained our teachers around best practices for working with the students in their class, and it has made all the difference in the world. Strategic corporate partnerships. It's hard to dream of becoming an investment banker if you've never met one. And so we bring corporations into our building. We have guest speakers. We bring our students out where they have an opportunity to go and to visit and to see what this real world that we say we're preparing them for in schools really is, so that they have a true opportunity to make a real difference in their lives. And so this has been the Eagle model and what we have done. How did that model ultimately impact the young men that I'm talking about, particularly the Plummer brothers? And so Victor graduated from Morehouse College with a degree in engineering after having taken full advantage of all the resources and the supports that he got at the Eagle Academy. He went on, and now he is working as an engineer, and he's going on to having a great life for himself. His twin brother, Corey, was not a great student, but he was a hard worker. And Corey has now gone on to join the U.S. military, and he's serving in Afghanistan and serving our country. And I'd say he's done very well for himself. He's married and has a child. But their older brother, who also came to us, Robert, the story didn't turn out as well for Robert. Robert was ultimately didn't graduate from Eagle. He was very angry, and it was hard to get across to him. In fact, he was part of the reason why we shifted our model to start at the 6th grade and not to start at the 9th grade. And he ultimately committed an armed robbery and assault and is now serving life in prison. And so our heart breaks for him and for all the other young men who struggled to find their way. But we truly believe that at the end of the day, the Eagle Academy is a model that can, in fact, work. We've doing it all over New York, and we're now training schools and school districts all across the country to show that we can, in fact, make a difference in the lives of our young men. And we as a nation need to be committed to changing the outcomes for boys of color. We owe it to ourselves. Thank you so much.